the Harvard Graduate School of Education, working at the nexus of practice, policy, and research.
Good evening, everyone. Nancy Jung and I, we want to extend to you a very warm welcome to the 10th Annual Alumni of Color Conference. We are extremely ecstatic that you have taken time out of your busy schedules to come and spend the next 2 days with us. Thank you. Now, many of you are in leadership, so you know how difficult it is to get your team on the same page, to have them share the mission and vision of your organization, and you're paying them. Well, our steering committee members, they're volunteers, student volunteers, who are master's and doctoral students with busy schedules and demanding coursework, and still, they gave of themselves, their time, their intellect, their energy, and their creativity. I'd like all the steering committee members to stand. Don't let me call you out. What you see here is a remnant. A good number are right now running around making sure that this phenomenal conference runs without a hitch. So we just want to thank every one of you for giving of yourselves. Without you, this wouldn't be. And I declare unequivocally that this is the best ever AOCC conference, unmatched, never ever to be the same again. Now, even though we have a phenomenal team, we could not have done this without the support of some very important people. So we want to recognize Dean Kathleen McCartney. Thank you for your support and your encouragement. We want to recognize Dr. Deborah Jewel Sherman, our advisor for AOCC 2012. We want to recognize the Office of Student Affairs. Where are you? Running around somewhere. Liz, Kevin, Tracy, thank you. We want to recognize Alumni Relations, Jody, Natalie, and all that team. We want to thank you to Harvard University Office of the Assistant to the President and the Schott Foundation for your financial support and your support in general. Without you, this wouldn't be. And of course, there's so many other people and so many other individuals and groups who we don't have time to mention, but thank you so much for everything you've done. Every contribution that you've made has created this event. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Now, can you believe it? It's been a decade of AOCC. A decade, so 10 years. Let's remember where we started 10 years ago. In 2009, we launched AOCC with the theme of exploring issues of race, ethnicity, gender, and identity in education. We leap forward to year 4, where we're honoring our communities and individuals as leaders of change. In year 6 and 7, we're raising our voices and crossing borders. And now in year 10 of AOCC, we continue to disrupt the discourse by discussing the undiscussables. And all of this work wouldn't be here now if it weren't for the founding students of AOCC in 2002, 2003. So we want to acknowledge them as well as all of the committed tri-chairs throughout the past 10 years. Let's give it a round of applause for their founders and chairs.
And since it's our 10th anniversary, many things have changed, including the fact that you can follow us on Twitter. And so we're at AOCC 2012. Please follow us throughout the weekend. But we also have a record-breaking number of youth, as well as faculty members who are involved in our 10th anniversary. So thank you. Thank you, Kathleen McCartney, for encouraging everyone to attend, and all of you for supporting our conference. And to commemorate our 10th anniversary, we also created a special video, so thank you to Matt Weber and Mark Robertson for creating this phenomenal video that you're about to see, which doesn't include all of the voices of the past 10 years, but includes some, and give you a little glimpse into the past 10 years. And without further ado, we will present the video to you. So thank you again for being here.
10 years. convening critical stakeholders in education to talk about those tricky, seemingly elusive issues about race and class in education.
We reinvigorate each other. We educate each other. We share best practices. We build a network. We can stand up for changes that we need to see.
I think the importance of AOCC is its ability to gather together a wonderful group of students who are diverse on so many dimensions.
Students were able to create a space to talk about race and equity in education, that students were mobilizing not only other students but practitioners in the field, research, so that we can engage in this topic and really talk about this.
Through the years, I am so impressed with the tri-chairs. It never ceases to amaze me the level of competence and passion and commitment.
So this year's conference is focused on disrupting the discourse, discussing the undiscussable. And it's a theme that we chose because of the importance of making sure that we say what we often don't say, that we speak our truth.
Coming together to have those difficult conversations about the undiscussables, the gargantuan, obese, trumpeting elephant in the room that everybody is aware of but won't talk about.
When we had the first meeting about planning this year's conference, I was sitting in this room and there were probably 35 or 40 people in the room, and I found myself thinking that that's more people than even attended the first conference, and there is some sort of power in thinking about that growth.
It's made the last 10 years really different. The landscape of the school is different because of it.
It's hard work. It's hard work. So I think 10 years of this conference helps to ensure the pipeline of thought, of scholarship, of care, of love.
Conference has been instrumental in keeping me connected to current students and to more recent alum, both personally and professionally.
Another thing that you should know is that the Alumni of Color Conference throws the best party Hugsy sees every single year.
I'll never forget Dr. Karen Mapp getting out there grooving, and that was just inspiring to all of us because it showed us that even the people we aspired to be were real people and needed to connect and needed to enjoy each other's company.
We're going to really honor our 10th anniversary. We're going to celebrate it. We're going to have a nice dinner. And we're going to really honor all of the work that came before us and where we are today.
It is going to be a fabulous occasion, and I am so proud to be a part of it. I think I made some serious mistakes there.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Kathy McCartney. I'm the Dean of the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm just so happy to be able to say a few words as we open up the 10th AOCC. We always open it up with a very special Ask With forum, as we will do tonight. And I know that there were a couple of people that Dawn forgot to thank. It's time for the tri-chairs to stand up and be recognized. So Jung Cho, Nancy Gutierrez, and Dawn Miller, stand up and be recognized. And there are just so many people who work so hard, and I know you acknowledged many of them, but I'm confident, having looked at the program, that the fruits of your labor will have been worth it. So thank you very much to you and to the steering committee and to the many groups from the leadership team here. I don't know if Matt Weber is here, who put that video together. Matt, stand up. You're just amazing. Thank you for that. And welcome home to the alumni who are here. I understand that we have a record number of people who have registered with respect to both alumni and faculty, so that's a wonderful thing. I also want to thank John Jackson. I know that Deborah's going to say a few words about him, but he's a member of our Alumni Council, and we're just very grateful for his presence at this special event. And with respect to the alumni, obviously you are what makes this event so special. I mean, you come here to us as leaders in the field, as mentors for the current students who are here, and as friends and colleagues of the faculty. We have missed you, and it's so wonderful to be able to welcome you back. You know, I was the AOCC co-founder, Louis Rodriguez, and Nancy Gutierrez wrote, and I think this is so poignant, that the first Alumni of Color Conference was born with 14 students of color sitting around a table discussing how to proactively create an unforgettable presence at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and ultimately impact the education sector writ large. And from that vision has come a dream that's been fulfilled 10 times over. The AOCC is thriving, as you know. We had more proposals submitted this year as ever before. And this event has really become one of our signature events here at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. It's part of what makes this community so vibrant and so special. I think some of you know that one of my heroes is the Dalai Lama, and we had the honor of hosting him here several years ago. And one of the things that he has written that has inspired me is this, that peace does not mean an absence of conflicts. Differences will always be there. Peace means solving these differences through peaceful means, through dialogue, education, knowledge, and through humane ways. And I think the AOCC is really emblematic of this important vision. The AOCC co-chairs reminded us of some of the provocative themes of the past. I'm really proud of the way that the AOCC has promoted open dialogue about different topics in order to promote a more peaceful and just world for students and educators. And there's no doubt that you have had a profound impact on the Harvard Graduate School of Education and how we do our work. I thought you might be interested. Just wanted to say a little bit about some of what you might have been reading about the school. Some of you have gotten these bracelets, and if you haven't got one and you would like one, we'd be happy to pass them out. Yeah, they're coming around, but they say, create caring communities, prevent bullying. And I thought I'd just tell you about some of the work that some members of the faculty have been doing that we also hope will not only strengthen our community, but strengthen school communities. A number of us just became concerned about some very high-profile events involving children taking their lives, involving children being harmed in schools. Another one happened just this week. And so we've done a number of things this year. We've tried to reach out to you through the Alumni Network to let you know, but the first thing we did is we created an It Gets Better video, and I hope some of you have had the opportunity to see that. We're really proud of it. Earlier this month, we had a sneak preview of a film, a documentary called Bully, that was made by Lee Hirsch. It's extraordinarily powerful, and I hope many of you will have the opportunity to see it. It opens in April. And you may have heard, it was in the news, that Lady Gaga was here this week. She launched her Born This Way Foundation. But we were proud to host that event, but we also had a youth summit here right in this room. I guess it was just 2 days ago on Wednesday. We had student leaders from California and from Cambridge who talked about their work to create caring communities. So this is a movement. We think we've just gotten started building it, and we hope we can count on you to join us. And I'm sure during the next couple of days you'll have some ideas for me and other members of the faculty on what we can do with respect to, well, this movement. So this year's conference theme is Disrupting the Discourse, discussing the undiscussable. And I know there are a number of keynote speakers who will be addressing this topic, beginning tonight with John Jackson. Tomorrow we'll be hearing from educator Lee Manoir. And of course, our closing keynote speaker will be our own Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot. The Tribe Chairs gave me the task of thinking about an undiscussable story that I might share with you. And I really gave this a lot of thought. So here's my story. Sometimes there are various organizations that convene deans of schools of education. And one of these events happened in November down in Washington, D.C. And I presented actually earlier in the day, and then after me, a dean presented, and the topic of her speech was improving the image of public education. So not improving public education, but improving the image of public education. And in the course of her remarks, she said something like, many people expect her to solve the achievement gap, but that's not the role of schools of education. And I don't know if you've ever been, I'm sure you all have been, kind of at a moment like this where you are, in fact, wondering whether or not it's time to be a provocateur, whether or not it's okay to just stop and listen, or whether or not you want to discuss the undiscussable. And I have to say, I'm so proud of this community, and I think sometimes we forget how different we are. We're not a perfect community. We're a community that keeps working on itself. But when we say we work at the nexus of practice, policy, and research, we mean it. So when it was all over, when her talk was over, it was time for questions, and I just found the courage to say something like this. I said, here's a thought experiment. If this were a convening of deans of medical schools, do we think any one of them would say it's not our job to cure cancer? And there was a long, pregnant pause, and I said I thought it was our job to address the opportunity gap that existed in public education. And there was kind of a, this was, thank you. Yeah. I wasn't very popular that day, but I felt so good about doing it. I mean, these are the group of ed school deans. This is a community, one of many communities that I belong to. And I think very highly of this community, but I also think that it's my job to help schools of education move forward by doing work directly. And we should be gauging ourselves by our impact on public education, not by how many citations we have in journal articles. I think that's a real switch for schools of education, and I think that we're one of the schools of education that's really modeling the way forward. So thank you for giving me that opportunity. It felt good to share it with you. And now I think I have the privilege of introducing some extremely special guests that are going to put a smile on everybody's faces. Our tri-chairs have been wise enough to open this event with the King Elementary School Singers right here. I want to thank Principal Jessica Bolt and Director Diane Thornton. Let's give a big round of applause for the King Elementary School Singers.
Let can be it if I just believe it. There's nothing to it. I believe I can fly. I believe I can touch the sky. I think about it every night and day, and spread my wings and fly away. I believe I can soar. I see me running through that open door. I can fly. 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 I can fly if I just spread my wings. I can fly. 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 I can fly if I just spread my wings. I can fly. 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 I can fly if I just spread my wings. Fly, fly, fly.
I wanted to thank Ms. Thornton and those wonderful children and one of our alums, Almia Beta, from the Boston Public Schools, who was instrumental in having them come here. Can we give them another round of applause? As superintendent in Richmond, there were a couple of years when every graduating class sang, "I believe I can fly," so I just was sitting there. Took me back, but that's not the reason that I am up here. I have the distinct privilege and pleasure of introducing our keynoter for this Ask With Forum. He is our own John H. Jackson, who serves as the president and CEO of the Schott Foundation for Public Education. In this role, he leads the foundation to ensure a high quality of education for all students, regardless of race or gender. He certainly believes that demography is not destiny for the children under his watch. Prior to this role, he served with the Urban League in a variety of leadership positions, and he did that for 7 years. While there, he authored the NAACP National Call for Action in Education, which challenged governors across the nation to develop 5-year plans to reduce the racial disparities in their respective states by 50%, a bold vision. He has served as an adjunct professor, has received appointments by President William Jefferson Clinton to the Office for Civil Rights, and has served as part of President Obama's transition team. He is well published. One seminal work is his book, Race in America and the Rise of the Civil Rights Movement, 1896 to 1954. He is a graduate of Xavier University in Louisiana, holds a Juris Doctorate, but what we think of when we think of Dr. John H. Jackson is that he is one of us. He is an alum of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. He is our equity warrior, and I ask you at this time to please welcome home in the way that we do at Hugsy, one of our own, Dr. John H. Jackson.
Thank you. Let me just say it's good to be home. I started this week off Sunday in Spain, Monday in Paris, Tuesday in DC, then Tuesday night in New Orleans, a couple of days in New Orleans, and I got back last night. I was feeling a little tired, but after seeing that choir, you know, I feel like I can fly. I want to do another chorus. You know, let me just say it's good to be home. It's good to be here and to see members of the faculty and to be here in Asquith. I remember as a student, during my time, you know, we would come to Asquith Forum and you would have one discussion, and then you would have to go to AOCC and have another discussion. I'm just glad to see that we're able to have the same discussion in the same space now, because to me, that is progress. And that represents an educational process that I think that makes Harvard Graduate School of Education richer because of the experiences of the students and the ability to have the discourse in these places and spaces. So Dean, thank you for your leadership. And what I really like about your leadership, Dean, is that from day one, from the first meeting I sat down, you were focused on impact. And you know, what can I do to follow Lady Gaga and Oprah? But I think it's important to have those types of partnerships, because we have to recognize that there are some people who will never come in contact with Gutman, Asquith, you know, Longfellow Hall, that a message from others bringing a message that we hold as a part of our value means so much more. And I think that that is the important part of the educational process, that the thought leadership is just not here at the institution, but we're able to tap into thought leadership that exists in so many other communities. So thank you for your leadership. I'm just glad to see everyone here on a Friday afternoon. You know, you could have been so many places, but I'm glad you took the time to invest some moments here to talk about what I consider to be a very important issue. I want to thank the tri-chairs for your leadership. That sounds so official, the tri-chairs. Almost sounds like a group. But for your leadership, because I know it's been hours and sleepless nights getting us to this point to have this important conversation. And thank you for your investment. You know, it reminds me of the story that I like to tell of an old man who decided to marry a very young woman. And as the story is told, it was an old jealous man. And he became ill, and he pulled his young wife by his side. He said, "Promise me that when I die, you're going to bury me with all of my money, because I don't want you spending my money on any other man." And she made the promise. And it came to pass that the old man passed away, and at the funeral, the young widow approached the casket with her girlfriend by her side. She pulled an envelope out of her purse. She put it in the casket. And as she began to walk away, her girlfriend just shook her head. She said, "Tell me, girl, you didn't keep that promise." She said, "I did, but I wrote him a check." So it's very important that we invest in what we can invest in right now, because there will become a point when we can no longer make those types of investments. Discourse, disrupting the discourse. You know, I think as we have a conversation about disrupting the discourse, we first have to acknowledge that the current discourse, and discourse occurs on several different levels. Often when we talk about discourse, we are talking about it at a very surface level, where the political wins, where we hear narratives, stories, often connected to elections, a discourse about what's happening in this community and what's happening over here, and things like equity and words that come up like justice. And it's a part of a political win. But then if you go to a little deeper to the surface current, we begin to talk about issues like accountability, issues like choice, charters, budgets, regulations. These are where, you know, we get a little bit closer, and those discourses often happen in certain places and spaces across the country. And then there's that undercurrent where there are some real deep issues, issues of race, racism, classism, issues around immigrant status, culture, ethnicity. Too often we don't find the places and spaces where we are having these discussions and we are having these discourses. And it's important to recognize, however, that 80% of even the Earth's climate is determined by what happens in the undercurrent, not by the political winds, not by the surface waters, but the undercurrent. So it says something when we say that we don't often get to the undercurrent discussions. So when Eric Holder says that this country has to talk more about race, and it carried all around, it's because it was an undercurrent issue that people are not often used to addressing. So I go from there and I go to the spotted owl. There's a connection. The spotted owl for a number of years was becoming extinct. Until 1990, it was added to the endangered species list. And as a result of that, there was 2.4 million acres of land in 3 states that was blocked off so that the spotted owl would have an environment and an ecosystem where it could actually thrive, We changed the law. The salamander. I was reading an article a couple weeks ago about in Mississippi. There were a group of salamanders who couldn't necessarily breed because there was a highway between the pond and where they were. And they would often try to cross the road, but wouldn't make it across. I won't get graphic. So what they decided to do was to change the law to lower the traffic speed to 35 degrees so more of the salamanders could make it across, to create an ecosystem and an environment where they could actually thrive. And in certain cases, there were some sheriff's officers and others who would physically take the salamanders across the road to put them in a better place so that they could actually thrive. It was called Slow Down for Salamanders. This is in Mississippi. For a number of years, FedEx, UPS, others were having some problems tracking their packages, till they came up with a very elaborate tracking system. Now, as many of us know, they can track a package by the hour, and in some places even by the minute. You can go online and you can find out where your package is. And then there are services like Zappo, where you can order something today and it will be at your front door tomorrow in a box. And they will also include information so that if you don't like it, you can send it back. But then we think about the fact that 47% of black males are graduating from high school. This is an issue that we focus on, a lot of attention on at the Schott Foundation, because a number of years ago, we asked the question, what are the experiences for students in public education today and in education across the board? And we didn't want to identify that by looking at the experiences of students who are at the top, the 4.0s. But we wanted to know who's consistently at the bottom. And in 36 of the 50 states, as we looked at graduation rates, black males. And in another 12 states, Latino males. In many of the 36 states where black males were at the bottom, Latino males were second to the bottom, consistently. So much so that today, nationally, 47% of black males are graduating from high school. In states like New York, which enrolls the largest number of black males, 25% are graduating each year. Nebraska, 40%, Wisconsin, 50%. And I highlight Wisconsin because you look at the level of the gap, 50% and 92%. Which sort of says that we know how to go through the process of graduating individuals, but we haven't extended that process to a certain population. But nationally, we're looking at a 47% problem. We're looking at a challenge of black males not having an ecosystem or an environment by which they can thrive or have the opportunity to learn. So I began to ask, well, where is the Slow Down for Salamander law for black male, what did we actually give them? And we ended up with race to the top. We ended up with a policy that says that in many respects that you need to run faster to get across that road. States, teachers, you need to teach better in order to get across faster. Some would even say that it's a process that by its very nature will produce winners and losers. A competition that says that some states will win and some states will actually lose as a national policy. Others have said that, it's a process and it's a policy that will relegate two routes for individuals, either the military economy or those who will work as a part of the Walmart economy. We know that there's a major challenge in our country right now with disciplinary actions and students being pushed out, an overrepresentation of minorities related to suspensions and expulsions across the country. This isn't new. These are not new data. When I worked at the Office for Civil Rights in 2000, this is a challenge that we were highlighting. We put out some guidance on it. I asked, well, how do we deal with this? Is there a FedEx system, a UPS system to track where these students are going? How do states deal with it? Well, I was just in Louisiana and in New Orleans for a couple of days, and I was talking to some of the parents and some of the leaders there, and they talked about for the last 5 years how in order to enroll a child in school, because as you know, a number of the schools are individual LEAs, local education agencies, and a parent has to go to each school with an application, apply. If that school doesn't accept the child, then go to another school, apply. If that school doesn't accept the child, go to another school, fill out that application, apply, and keep going through that process until you actually find a school that will accept your child. Now, they're going to move for the first time, many of the schools, to a central enrollment system, but it says something that under our union, we still allow this to occur. But better yet, as far as tracking the students, if a student is fortunate enough to enroll, there is only 2 tracking points during the school year, October 1st and February the 1st. So if a student is enrolled on October the 1st, the student is picked up. Should the student drop out? Should the student not show up? Should the student transfer on October the 2nd or 3rd? The district would not pick it up again until February the 1st. So there are months that a student can exist within New Orleans, around the community, and the district never know whether or not the student is attending school. Political winds, surface currents, undercurrents. So there's a lot of discourse that we're having about education in our country today. A lot of conversations. But I submit that there are, even if we are successful in talking about the undercurrent, the race, the class, and those types of issues, that until we're able to begin to address some of the other policy pieces, that it becomes, we have not yet begun to move the lever. Often what you will see is a conversation about the challenges and the disparities that exist and the programs that are available to address them. We know that there are a number of programs to address these issues in many communities. But one thing I want us to think about, in the communities that work, we don't often see a lot of programs because that which is a program has already been institutionalized in the system. That which we know works is a part of what every parent or every child can actually access. So I do think that it's important to note that as I talk about these disparities and as we move on from here, our goal is not to think of these challenges and think of what's another program that we can develop. When we look at 47% dropout rate, when we look at the level of the lack of access to ELL and other supports, we are not going to program our way out of this challenge. There's just, coming from the world of philanthropy, there's not enough philanthropic dollars to program our way out of this. I say that programs are progress, but policy is power. And our goal is not to make the back of the bus more comfortable. but our goal is to change the very system that creates the disparities. I'll give you an example. We know that there is a very high incarceration rate in our country, and so much so that the U.S. leads all other nations in the number of its citizens incarcerated. We know that there is a disparity in who's actually being incarcerated. As I began to look at some of those data points, you will see a consistent incarceration rate up until around the early 80s, a consistent rate. And then you will notice a 45-degree spike, a 45-degree spike that would make one believe that, a group of Latino and African-American males got together and said, we're going to create more crimes and we're going to get caught. And you know what? We're going to be incarcerated. But no, you've got to follow the fact that the federal sentencing guide policies changed in the early 80s, which led to this extreme increase. And then during the Clinton administration, there was a double down on that policy with Clinton and Gingrich policy on the federal law. So I say this to say that our role during this season has to, yes, I'm not saying we should shy away from the programs because there's some progress, but to take those elements which we know work and to begin to institutionalize them in order to build a system where all students have the opportunity to learn. Because the current policy flow, everyone likes to talk about NCLB, it's the poison. But one thing that is clear, it is probably the latest anchor that has been dropped to impact the undercurrent. Because within NCLB, it required the disaggregation of data by race and ethnicity. So it definitely hit the undercurrent. The challenge is that it's a performance-driven policy that's driven based on a lot of assumptions around testing, a lot of assumptions that we just haven't yet proved around testing and outcomes, but we cannot deny that it was the latest drop. I will say that if you look here, race to the top, it hasn't yet hit the undercurrent. Number one, because it is essentially a budget, essentially a granting process that hasn't impacted all of the states. Some would say, well, there are some laws that have changed because of it. The states have changed their laws, but they've changed their laws to change structures, not necessarily to change the way that students are receiving their educational outcomes. I put this over here because there was a number of years that the Schott Foundation worked on a campaign called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And there have been a number of lawsuits in our country around equity in education. Most of us are familiar with Brown versus the Board of Education, and we thought that after Brown, it's going to be equal. We can go home. But I often say that Brown was a first down, not a touchdown. Because in 1973, the Supreme Court was asked, is education a federally protected right? And they said no. They said, we'll leave it up to the states. And since that point, in over 40 states, you've had these equity and adequacy lawsuits with very little result. CFE is a part of that, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity. And I put it there at a very shallow level because even after that lawsuit, the governor stepped in, Governor Spitzer at the time, and said, okay, we recognize that we have these disparities and we have to correct them, so I will make a commitment of some additional resources. It was a political commitment. Well, the governor was removed for reasons we won't go into here. And with the removal of the governor, in many respects, also went the commitment. So as we talk about policy reform, we want to make sure that we are dropping policy levels that are deep enough and our anchors that are deep enough to reach the undercurrent, but are strong enough to bring about the type of systemic change. The systemic change is necessary. That's why I believe that Congress has to reauthorize the Elementary Secondary Education Act, or what is now called NCLB, No Child Left Behind Act. because ESEA is an anti-poverty bill. It was created in 1965 as a part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty. But we don't often talk about it. We talk about the accountability, we talk about whether or not evaluations, we talk about unions, we talk about this, but we don't talk about the fact that ESEA was created as a way for our country to begin to address poverty in this country, recognizing that education and the opportunities that are produced through education is the bridge to opportunity and other resources across the country. But yet we know that black males who drop out face a lifetime of low earnings. And some of you all are probably saying, Eureka, the system, are you saying that there's a racism, there are disparities in education? I could have told you that from the days of slavery. The system was set up like that. This isn't anything new. But I will say that even the business model in which the country set up on that Thomas Jefferson talked about, when he said that, but as it is, we have the wolf by the ear. And this is his explanation to John Holmes around slavery. He said, we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is in one scale and self-preservation in the other. So he recognized that we have a business model that we've sort of adopted that isn't necessarily just, but at the same time, how do we let go of it? I submit today that we are neither practicing justice nor self-preservation. If you look at the demographics of our country, they're swiftly changing. Our business model of not providing equitable educational opportunities to all students will not allow our country to thrive. Number one, we are looking at one of the largest wealth gaps in our country's history since the Depression. The dark blue bars represent the bottom 90% and the income growth there. The light blue represents the top 1%. And as you can see that early on, there was a very different distribution of resources back in the Depression. But during the 60s, the 70s, that changed. Well, here we were from 2002 to 2007, and we are increasingly opening this gap, which is unsustainable. Our president has said that several State of the Unions ago that in order for our country to be globally competitive by 2020, we must be a global leader in post-secondary education. In order to do that, we would have to educate some 21 million more students above our current rate. Now, we don't get there unless we educate more Native American, Hmong, Latino, African American students. We're at this intersection that unless our country provides more equitable opportunities to all, our country can't thrive. In fact, we need at least 5.7 million more students enrolled in our 8th through 12th system above our current rate in order to get there. So what does that tell us? We've got to go back and get some of those students that we've already lost in order to hit that 2020 goal. So this isn't about an issue that only impacts the African American community, the Latino community, or those who have been historically left behind, but this is an issue that impacts our entire country. And why did the president say that? I won't go too deep in statistics or regression analysis of all of that, although I know you might want me to. So I'll try to get this right, though. This shows the correlation between education and wages 30 years ago, 1979. And as the line is flat, it shows that there is some correlation, but a very weak correlation. And also, if you saw a stronger correlation, you would see more of the states closer to the line, So you see some outliers, Arkansas and West Virginia, and that can be explained, by oil and coal mining. It wasn't a very high degree. There's some correlation, but not a very high degree of correlation between education and wages. Well, 2009, you see a very steep slope. You see many of the states are closer to the line. And the president knows it, and as he outlined it, over 2/3 of all new jobs will require some college education. So again, this is about as we talk about our economy, our labor force, and even more I want to talk about our communities and families, the ability to earn a livable wage. This is all connected to that. So, which way do we go? This is a real stoplight in London. I won't explain it, but it's real. Which way do we go? I think first we have to recognize that we have been born and we live during a season where our job is not just to evaluate. It's not just to analyze the problem, and I know you're here, we do research, and we're in academia, but we have to go beyond research. It's not just to criticize those who are a part of this generation. I grew up on the south side of Chicago, and I grew up a Chicago Bulls fan. That team that has 6 national championships. I'm sorry, I know. I bow down if you're from Boston, but otherwise, hey. But I remember a journalist talking to Michael Jordan. He asked him the question. He said, what is the best team that you've ever been on? Thinking he would say it was the team where he won the national championship. He was MVP of the league, and he won all of the honors. He said, yeah, those were the good years. He said, but the best team I ever was a part of had someone on it that everyone thought should not be on the team because they thought he was a misfit. Someone that when we recruited, everyone said, why would they recruit? We're already a good team. Why would they bring this person on this team? And that person was Dennis Rodman. He said, Dennis had his challenges. He said, but I knew that there was something that Dennis could do better than any other person any other player in the NBA. He said, and that was rebounding. He said, I knew that if I took a shot and I missed, he would be right there to rebound and give me another shot. I knew that if I took another shot and I missed, he would be right there to rebound and give me another shot. And he said, and I knew that the more shots that I took, the more I would hit. We're not a generation that was born to be critical of this generation, but we're one that was born to rebound for this generation. If we are to think but for a parent, but for a mother, but for a teacher, rebounding for us, we would not be where we are today. So we first have to recognize that we are a part of a rebound generation. Secondly, it's something that I always told my students at Georgetown. There's clear evidence that regardless of race or ethnicity, we're 99.6% the same. In fact, there are more genes to explain the variance in our eye color than our racial or ethnic differences. So to the degree that we're 99.6% the same, any variance that we see in educational performance that's identifiable by race or ethnicity is not caused by the racial or ethnic differences, but the social policies and social practices which lead to those differences. So our charge is to identify those social policies, identify those social practices which produce a result that's identifiable by race, and address them and eliminate them. And then we have to recognize that even as we talk about the achievement gap, that in order to address the achievement gap, we have to address the opportunity gap. In many respects, we are measuring whether or not our children can swim by putting them in pools with no water. I'll show you. This is a national map of the performance for black males across the country. The red states represent graduation rates below 50%. The light red, graduation rates between 50 and 59%. Light green, graduation rates between 60 and 69%. The green states, graduation rates over 70%. If you notice the green states, South Dakota, North Dakota, got any black men in here from South Dakota? Any brothers here from North Dakota? Maine. They're doing well in places where they are so small that they can't be relegated or isolated to under-resourced spaces. And when they are educated in the same space with their peers, in many respects, our data indicates that they performed on par or even better. So that we wanted to ask the question, well, what are the experiences for white males in an under-resourced district? So we went to Detroit, where 27% of black males graduate from high school, and we found that only 19% of white males were graduating from high school. Some would say that it was a smaller number, but some would say they were trapped in the poor system. But that highlights the point that this issue of performance is not about an issue of race or ethnicity, but an issue of providing all students a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. And what makes it an issue of race or ethnicity is that certain individuals are more often relegated to those spaces where they don't have the opportunity. So we need to, in addition to recognizing it's about opportunity, we need to kill the bad models. The current model for system change is around a conversation of developing standards, establish achievement, performance-based accountability, and then evaluate. I guarantee if you have entered this conversation, you've had a conversation about one of these over the last couple of years, over the last decade. Standards, accountability, evaluate. But we never have the conversation around addressing the opportunity gap. And in many respects, we know the solutions. We know, and we've known for years, the research has proven that all children should have access to early childhood education. If you look at the data proves that it's effective. If you're in business, it's the highest return on investment. We know the impact. But yet, we're able to go to states and go to one particular area of the state where only 60% have access, and another particular area where 90% may have access. All students should have access to early childhood education. In many respects, as we begin to go across the world, in places like Singapore and Shanghai, where they're currently out competing us, we asked them, went with a group a couple of months ago, and we asked them, well, what did you do? What did you do to make up? And it didn't take 30 years. This is a 10-year period. You know, one of them sort of jokingly said, well, you know, we came to the US, we looked at your research, and we went back and implemented it. So we don't have an innovations challenge, we have an execution challenge. So there are certain things that we already know that we can follow on. They also said, well, they asked us a question once they, felt comfortable. They said, well, why do you all focus so much on structures, structural changes, moving the pieces? Almost to say that if someone stood up and said, hey, it's cold in here, they might bring in blankets, we would bring in another thermometer. At what point do we begin to get to the supports? So our model for effective system change has to first address the opportunity and resource accountability system to ensure that all students, and that is what happens inside of the school as well as outside of the school. We have to ensure that we have high standards, because one of the things that we also discovered is the standards that we say that we have that are high standards, not so much. We began to talk a little bit about their tests comparing to my tests. They said they don't give bubble tests. They said they have open-ended questions. They said we ask the students questions that have multiple answers. Imagine that. Because what's more important is the process of thinking rather than coming to some resolved answer. So we want to ensure that we have high standards. We want to ensure that we also have the space for the transformative learning experiences, recognizing that all students don't learn the same way. And learning can occur in a number of different modes. Believe it or not, when we were in Belgium, there was a school that was set up based on the understanding of multiple intelligence, emotional intelligence. And they had one portion of it where they focused on music, and another where they focused on using the hands. And they would even teach math classes by, they would go out into the garden, and the teacher would use different things because there were some students who were better working with their hands. There were some students who were good with music, just like many of these students here. If we can teach them to sing, if they can learn half notes and quarter notes, they can learn certain algebraic equations. The question in our challenge is, how do we take that, build a bridge to make the learning transitive? So opportunity, resource accountability, high standards, the transformative learning experience, and then we can discuss the achievement of output accountability. The challenge with this model is you never get to the transformative learning experiences. You never are able to integrate the new learning experiences that are necessary to achieve the high outcomes that we desire. I don't think that we have to sacrifice the high outcomes by integrating a new model. So what does this mean? This means that, number one, it's an admission that our challenges that exist are very complex. But there are some answers and some things that we know. First, we've got to kill the current discourse. The current discourse that is very divisive, that isn't even designed to answer the problem. It's not about pro-union, anti-union. If the unions were the problem, the schools in the South would be better, where you don't see more collective bargaining and agreements. But I showed you that's not the case. It's not pro-charter, anti-charter. You know, charters only educate 4% of the students across this country. What is the plan for the other 96% of those students? Let's kill that argument. We are not in a post-racial period. One black man in the White House with 400,000 in prison doesn't bring you to a post-racial space. So we still need to have the discussions. We still need to have the policy solutions. We need opportunity to learn policies. Policies that are based not on performance. There's clear evidence, a number of books in the countries have said that performance-driven reform doesn't work, but policies that are based on opportunity. What I've said is we know the students who are behind. We've known for a number of years. Perhaps we should give every student that is a grade level or more behind an opportunity plan, a plan that will give them access to additional academic support, whether it be tutoring, additional ELL, LEP supports, a plan that will give them access to additional social supports, a mentor. Clear evidence, and we know that mentoring works. We have served as mentors. We've been in the programs year after year. And I'm not talking about a volunteer mentor, but a mentor that can stay with the student throughout the period of the plan, a mentor that is paid for out of the coffers of the city, state, and federal budget. And I know some of you always say, well, that's too radical. How do you do that? Well, we pay for probationary officers now out of the budget. And many of them send our young people to places that it costs us more money to keep them there. So it seems to me that we would invest on the front end, project a lower number of beds needed on the back end, and recognize the cost savings as a part of an opportunity budget. Additional social, academic, but also health supports. We can identify the health challenges which serve as barriers to students' opportunity to learn. Asthma, eyesight, dental health, mental health. Why not ensure that a student who is under an opportunity plan has those checks? And it's not a plan that a student stays in perpetuity, but a 2 or 3 year sunsetting period to give the student some time to actually catch up. And while the student is under the plan, let's institute a different disciplinary policy. If suspension is necessary, in-school suspension, but educational services must continue. If out-of-school suspension is necessary, suspend them to a mentoring program, a faith institution. But educational services must continue because the goal is to provide that student an opportunity, not to push the student out. But we also need opportunity to learn judicial systems, not where the knee-jerk reaction is incarceration. The president, during the State of the Union, called out colleges and universities because of the rising cost of tuition, which is a problem. But he also has to address the fact that there is a rising number of incarcerations. States must move to reduce the number of individuals who are being incarcerated. And the federal government can't afford to continue to fund states with the increase in incarceration, continue to fund building more prisons at the cost of our educational system. We want opportunity to learn faith institutions, those who, where the congregation knows the number of students who are enrolled in early education, knows, how the parents are engaged. Opportunity to learn businesses. What are those? Are those businesses that give parents time off to go to parent-teacher conferences? Businesses who invest their philanthropic endeavors to support the type of things that provide opportunities. My message here is the problem is not just at the doorstep of the schools. The conversation right now is around teachers and evaluating the teachers. And yes, we've got to come up with a better way to measure the effectiveness of teachers. But we also, after we've measured, have to give them the supports to be effective. But the large challenge of today is not a teacher failure problem, it's a systems failure problem. And until we begin to audit the systems that our students will impact, the family system, the early education system, just want to make sure you were up, the judicial system, the higher education system, because in many states, like New York, 2/3 of all students are coming to our system of higher education in need of remedial courses. So we've got to evaluate what is the role of higher education in beginning to prepare a bridge. So our educational system is less about having students race to the top and more about going back and catching those who are behind and building a pipeline to provide all students a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. There are breaches. If you can envision a pipeline, there are breaches in the pipeline. First is early education. Second is whether or not a child is literate by 3rd grade. If not, we've got to make sure that we see all types of problems if a child isn't literate by 3rd grade. How do we improve that breach? Then we've got to deal with the suspension, dropout breach that occurs. The transition from middle school to high school. The transition from secondary school to higher education. These things can be fixed. But it is going to take us recognizing that each and every one of us play a very unique role. It's no different than the role and the types of role that those individuals played to get us to this point. And I like the way that the dean put it, this is not necessarily just a program, but this is a movement. When you came here as a part of a movement, and you came here to continue a movement, students. No different than the movement before. I like to think about a man who is the emblematic expression of that, Bayard Rustin. How many of you all are familiar with Bayard Rustin? How many of you are familiar with the 1963 March on Washington? Oh, Jean said she was there. Bayard Rustin actually organized the March on Washington. And I remember listening to a documentary and a journalist talking with him, and they asked him, what was the most important part of the march? Thinking he would say it was Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, Mahalia Jackson's song, Roy Wilkins' speech. He said, the most important part of it was the fact that those individuals who said that they would make 1,000 signs showed up with 1,000 signs. Those individuals who said that they would make 100 sandwiches showed up with 100 sandwiches. Those individuals who said that they would be on the corner of 3rd and F at 4 o'clock were actually on the corner of 3rd and F at 4 o'clock. And this was long before cell phones and you could text, are you there yet? There was a level of execution. And he also said, but equally important were those individuals who stayed after to sweep the streets so that we wouldn't get fined. All played a very significant role. We have to recognize that we each play a significant role. For some of us, it's our research. Others, it's our writing. Others, it's our organizing. Others, it's our engagement. But I think Dr. King said it best when he said that if it falls your lot to be a street sweeper, sweep streets like Michelangelo painted, Like Shakespeare wrote poetry, like Raphael carved marble. Do it so well that the hosts of heaven and earth will say, there lived a great street sweeper who swept his or her job well. And that is our challenge. And in doing that, we will see progress. If we recognize that we are fighting for opportunity, not just achievement, but opportunity. And all students can learn. And then the final point is we've got to recognize that it's going to take something that a little boy had to teach his father. Father was reading his son a bedtime story. Little boy said, Daddy, he finished the story, he kissed his son on his head. Little boy said, Daddy, can you bring me a glass of water? The father said, son, it's bedtime. I'm sorry, I can't bring you a glass of water. I'm not giving you water before you go to bed. Good night, son. Got up, began to walk out. Here's his son again. Daddy, can you bring me a glass of water? Father, a little more perturbed, said, son, I'm perturbed. He said, I just explained to you. You had all day to get water. I'm not giving you water before you go to bed. I'm a little upset. If I come back in here, I'm going to have to spank you. Father gets up, walks out, closes the door, hears his son. Daddy, when you come back in here to spank me, can you bring me a glass of water? It's going to take a level of persistence if we really care about this particular issue. It's no different than the persistence that got us here. And I believe that if we bring the persistence, if we bring the call for the type of systemic change that's necessary, and a call to provide all students a fair and substantive opportunity to learn, we will see the type of progress that many nations are seeing right now. And we will, again, be a nation that provides opportunity to all who are within. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, John. Now we have two mics in the aisles. If you have questions for Dr. Jackson, please make your way to those mics. Thank you.
Hi. How you doing, my brother? Good. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
How you doing?
Good.
First of all, I want to thank you for being here. I don't know if I can raise this. I feel like I should break off in a song here.
Right.
No, I ain't going to do that. As I said, I want to thank you for being here. You're one of the most dynamic speakers that I've heard in a long time, and I always appreciate the opportunity to come out and listen to you speaking. Such an inspiration, and I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
I think you're a serious trooper in our community, and we really, really appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you.
I agree with everything that you say, you know, but unfortunately I do have to take exception in that I have to admit that I'm not optimistic that even if everything that you say comes to fruition, that it's really going to turn the situation around. I think the most important thing that I heard you say was about the issue of race. When we're not in a post-racial society. One thing that stuck out to me was when you pointed out what Thomas Jefferson had to say, and I think that's key because that's lays at the foundation of the systemic problem that you talk about. Right. What Thomas Jefferson was referring to when he made the statement that about self-preservation, when he said we, he wasn't talking about the whole of America. He was talking about white America. He right. said when he meant self-preservation, he meant the preservation of the white race.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think that's a systemic problem that has continued to today, and I think that's the underlying reason why we can't bridge this gap, because I think that the forces that be or powers that be see this equalization as a threat to white dominance or white preservation in our society. And I'm talking about the overwhelming institutional control of employment resources. The one thing that I agree with that you said I think is key when you talk about opportunity. I think the lack of equal opportunities in the workforce is the main issue relating to this educational dilemma, because I think that really it's not a matter of resources being directed at African Americans or in the black community, because I think, you know, as someone who grew up in grade school in the late 60s and early 70s, you know, it's kind of exasperating to hear this discussion, because it's not a new discussion. You talked about the President Johnson's war on poverty.
Hey man, I'm sorry. Didn't mean to disrupt the discourse, but just in the spirit, we're gonna get an opportunity reception afterwards. Maybe we can carry this on over there, but if we can, just as a rule, try to keep it in 8 words or less.
Okay, well, the bottom line here is, you know, I think that.
Yeah, question.
Well, the question is, you know, even if all of this comes to fruition, how is it going to make a difference? And my point that I want to make is, you know, black children, you know, need to be inspired to want to learn. I don't think you can force them, you can make them. If they don't believe that they get the grade, they're going to get the job, then nothing's going to change. They're not going to be motivated. And we've been in this country for a long time, and for hundreds of years when black folks were barred from education, and they still were motivated to learn and achieve academically. And so my point is, without the job, the carrot there at the end of the road, it's not going to make a difference. And so my question to you is, how do we address that issue at the top of, you know, in terms of the goal, letting, you know, folks know that there is a job available to them. If they get the grade, they're going to get the job, and, you know, motivate them in that way, instead of pouring money and money and money into the system and really not inspiring children to want to learn because they don't believe it's going to make a difference in their life.
Okay, so I agree with you that to the degree that there are those with ill intentions, and like I said, we're not in a post-racial society. But my whole premise is that until we begin to institutionalize the types of policies that are necessary, and we can't discount the fact that there have been policies that were put in place to move the country further. You know, some of us are here, sitting here in this space right now because there's a policy that says that the university has to allow you to sit in the space. Now, in some universities, there's the free will to say, open the space. For other universities, there wasn't that free will. You can't deny that there was a policy, and the implementation of the policy opened those doors. What's also undeniable is if you look at the data, from the 1970s to the early 1980s, the achievement gap in our country actually began to close. If you look at the reading, it actually began to close. You know, some would say, and my advisor, Gary Orfield, I've often heard him talk about how the implementation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the implementation of ESEA, all made an impact on how things were happening in schools across the country. So I'm not saying that this isn't something that we're just making up, but there's clear data that indicates that you can begin to make the type of progress if you put in place the types of policies. Now, will policy alone get you there? No. But I do believe that it's a huge step in the direction that the country needs to go in order to begin to address those types of challenges. Like Thurgood Marshall said, you can't legislate attitudes, but you can legislate behaviors. And if you legislate behaviors long enough, you may just change some attitudes.
First of all, I just want to thank you and AOCC for bringing you here, because it was a really refreshing conversation. My question is, how do we get to making these policies a reality where instead of Race to the Top focused on structures, we're focusing on things that will increase opportunities, whether it's, you know, someone who has the ear of the president or someone who's just working in the classroom. How do I make this happen instead of, you know, discussing it?
Well, there are policies at each level. I mean, even if we talk about at the school level, what is happening with disciplinary policies. As I looked at a number of the OCR data points on discipline, suspensions and expulsions, you see the disparity because a number of students are suspended for subjective matters. You know, insubordination, what is that? You know, so at the schoolhouse, their level, there are policies that can be impacted by teachers. Now, often the case is, and administrators and principals, often the case is they know that something's wrong. They'll talk about it in the faculty lounge, but you know, it never gets to a space where they begin to address the types of changes that are necessary. Outside, the parents are talking about it. That's why I think it's very important for not only to have parent involvement, but parent engagement. And this is the work that Karen Mapp has done. All of this stuff that we're talking about, there are great thought leaders here at Harvard University who's leading the work. So I'm saying that we have to go out and not just reproduce the work, but put that work in action. Connecting parents, teachers with parents, and mobilizing and organizing to change the types of policy, that's where it starts. Now, you can start at the schoolhouse level, the local level, the state level, or the federal level. Get in where you fit in. But I'm saying that if we want to change it, it can't be about just changing one classroom, but changing the system.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for being here. One of the things that was most striking for me was the conversation and the comment around policy versus practice. And it made me begin to think about the policy around teacher professional development. And I guess my question lies here in that one of the issues that we're dealing with in the establishment that I am in is cultural competence. And so one of the push that I would want to make is to have professional development be more targeted. So create a policy. There's one policy that says teachers have to have 30 hours. I'd like to make it a little more stringent that says part of those 30 hours have to be this. The pushback is there's nothing keeping them from having it be that. So why do we need to say that it is that? They're making a conscientious choice not to choose that. But we didn't say they couldn't do that. So it's like this, I guess my question, it's almost like, well, the policy doesn't keep people from doing it. But if you change the policy, they would have to do it. But the argument continues to be the policy isn't keeping them from doing it. So how do we address that? Is that a question? Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, if I understand the question right, there's always the ability to do it, whether you have the policy or not.
Yeah.
There's always the ability to be proactive in doing it in some environments that actually happens. I think that that's why the data is important. Number one, if it's happening and it's occurring effectively, and you see the type of results and they're not identifiable by race, and you see the type of outcome, great. If there is a problem, I do think that you have to begin to identify the policies and practices that are being put in place. Part of it is the existing policy. The other part may be the implementation of the existing policy. See, a lot of this doesn't necessarily require that you put a new policy in place. Another part of the analysis is evaluating what is in place and whether or not it's being implemented. So, for example, there's a policy in No Child Left Behind that if a student is in a failing school, that the student should have the right to transfer. Now, if you go to cities and you ask parents whether or not that's actually being implemented, no. So another part of it is, that's where, again, organizing engagement, is the implementation of those things that are already in place to ensure the type of outcome that's desired.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jackson, for being here. My question is specific to higher education policy, and I'm wondering how your findings relate to the new affirmative action case that's going to be coming up in the fall, and how that relates to the attack on affirmative action and race-based admission.
Yeah, I don't see it as a new case. It's something that the country has been dealing with for the last 20 or 30 years, this debate around affirmative action. And while we're dealing with it, we still see relatively low graduation rates, or a stagnant graduation rate from our institutions of higher education. You know, I think that policies that increase the likelihood that students of color will graduate, especially with the changing demographics of our country, are necessary. Now, whether or not the Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court sees it that way, is sort of challenging. They've been wrong before. In 1973 in San Antonio versus Rodriguez, when they said education is not a federal right, I think they were wrong. It should be a federal right because it's connected to our national interests. And it's something that, as a part of a social contract, that every individual in America should have the right to a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. So I think the policy is necessary. I don't think it's a new case. I am a little concerned that the Supreme Court is here. This Supreme Court is going to hear it. I think we have to organize, I think, but ultimately, whether the Supreme Court decides one way or the other, we as a community of people have to continue to push within the means possible to ensure that all students have access to our higher education institutions. I'm glad that I'm a part of an alum of an institution that said that we're going to give, scholarships to students who meet the poverty threshold. So I think that those are the types of things that we have to do in order to ensure that there's access.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Given that education is not a fundamental right and that you can have disparities in funding in K-12 education and that diversity is no longer a compelling state interest,
right,
what mechanism do you propose we institute, either on a state, federal, or even a local or even a grassroots level that could pass constitutional muster that could allow us to address the opportunity gap?
Well, I think, locally, there are a number of districts that are passing different taxing bills that are able to provide more resources to those schools that need additional resources. I look at a state like New Jersey through the Abbott decision. And in fact, New Jersey was the only state with with a significant African-American population with over 65% of the black males graduating across the state. Abbott is one of the few cases where the Supreme Court, the New Jersey Supreme Court, held jurisdiction. And when the governor wanted to change the funding formula, the Supreme Court said, no, you've got to meet the standard until these districts receive the support that's necessary. I think that that's very important. I think that many of the states have education written in their state laws as a constitutional right, even if it's not a federal right. Secondly, I think we've got to begin to evaluate our tax structure. Property-based funding for our school system creates an inherent inequity. And states can change that. States can change that. In places like Ontario, there's a different funding structure. When you add on top of it the number of districts that you have, someone said, well, you talk about Singapore. Singapore is the size of Kentucky. How can you use Singapore? But they haven't been able to do in Kentucky what Singapore is doing. In even smaller territory, the District of Columbia. So I would say that we have to evaluate our tax structure. There's something, and when we talk about innovation, we need to reimagine a new funding system for our school systems because the current funding structure does not work. At a more macro level, perhaps we want to, at some point, reconsider San Antonio versus Rodriguez. I think we live in a different system now. We have Common Core standards, so you can't say that there isn't this national structure on the states right now. There's been talk about a constitutional amendment. I know that there's a group, the Young People's Project, has been pushing that in the Southern Educational Foundation. And then through legislative language, I do think that you can write language that's strong enough to create those types of opportunities.
Thank you.
Hi. In the spirit of discussing the undiscussable, when you said that 80% of the issues are kind of in this undercurrent, and they're really what are driving and motivating a lot of these things that are happening, for me, what I kind of think back to is, as a current student here, how a lot of times the discourse is not in that 80%. And so I don't feel that we're necessarily given all the tools to tackle those policy issues. So in terms of being able to create policy that speaks to that, we need the tools. So what do you think needs to be changed about the ways that these issues are taught and the research that needs to be done to really get to that 80% of the issues that we need to have, that we need to change?
Well, first of all, I start off with and I think it's a great question, and I start off with the fact that you are here to raise, part of that is to raise those issues. And I say that not to say that it's just your responsibility, but it's your unique contribution to this space. We each we come from different places, different experiences, even those of us who look alike. We have different experiences that we're supposed to bring to this marketplace of ideas, or this place that we call a university, a classroom, put it on the table. At the same time, we have to ensure that there is the type of diversity in the faculty in order to begin to address these issues. And when I say that, it's very important that the research that is being conducted here can address the issues that are happening on the West Coast as well as within the Delta, as well as those that are happening in New Mexico and other parts of our country. So I think that it's important that our advocacy is in the classroom, but it goes beyond the classroom. I think it's important also that we're constantly evaluating, both alums and students and teachers and faculty, that we're constantly evaluating whether or not we have the type of diversity at our institution to tackle the challenges that exist. Now, no one, very few people are discussing, to your point, what's happening in that 80%. I was just down in New Orleans. We were talking to some students, and they were talking about nobody deals with our trauma. You know, they talk about people getting killed as if it's normal. Yeah, I saw this guy getting shot. He got shot. What did you do? Well, he was out there for a couple hours. People walked past him. That's trauma. They go to school. There's no social work capacity there for them to deal with that. So the day before, I was in Washington, D.C. at a meeting with Phi Delta Kappa. They collect the Gallup data on education. And one of the things that the data, one person highlighted, was that 15% of the international performance data is explained by well-being, the individual's state of mind, whether they're depressed or all. And I thought back on that. That's mixed up within that 80%. He said another 40 to 50% was explained by the well-being, whether or not they had the health support, the food, and all the. So before we even get to the teacher, the education issues, we're talking about 60 to 70% of the issue being impacted by something that has nothing to do with the school. But yet we're only talking about school-based reform. So our institution, when I talk about diversity, has to be able to talk about community systemic reform, parental engagement, community engagement, as a way to get to educational excellence. And then we have to challenge the systems outside of this to imagine those educational systems. A superintendent job is not just to direct those schools, but he or she has to become an advocate within the community and direct a system of supports to provide all students an opportunity to learn.
Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, just before you begin, we would like to continue this conversation, and we encourage you tonight, tomorrow, during the workshops, to continue to discuss the undiscussable. We're going to take 2 more questions, one from each side, and then we'll continue with tonight's agenda. All right, thank you.
Dr. Johnson, my question pertains to public charter schools and traditional public schools. In your opinion, what lessons can be learned from both educational models? What can public schools learn from charter schools, and what can charter schools learn from public schools?
It's funny that we make this huge distinction in this country as if it's a magical formula. If you have a good leader who supports good teaching and works with students and create a collaborative environment, whether it's a charter school or public school, it's the same result. It's the same result. I just came from New Orleans, where there are over 80 LEAs, 80 different, and there are probably only 4 of the schools that are above or what the state calls a B or A level. The remaining schools are C, D, or F. Charter, public. Good data that says only 17% of the charter schools are outperforming the traditional public schools. So my point is, I don't want us to get so wrapped up in these titles and these structures that we miss the point of what's necessary in order to give, to create the ecosystem or the environment where all students can learn. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take supporting teachers, not massively getting rid of teachers, as if there's a cadre of highly effective teachers ready to run in after you get rid of them. Turnover is not a good thing in the educational system. Districts and places that work, you don't see a high degree of turnover. You see stability. So I want us to focus on the things that we know, focus on those things that work, and then, you know, whether it's in a charter school or a public school, I will say, and this is just my opinion, at some point I do believe down the road they're going to end up recreating a public school system in New Orleans anyhow, because there are so many, they're so independent that the schools can't communicate. Just like I said, they can't track where the students are, and they're worrying about how to get what resources. So they're thinking through how to create a system. But there are some common pieces that work, and it's just about teaching and learning and supporting good teaching and learning.
Dr. Jackson, you've given us so many wonderful things to think about. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. I'm not particularly well-versed with NCLB or policy, so I'm hoping...
I'm not either, so well, I don't know too many people.
I'll defer to your expertise on this one, though. I'm hoping you might be able to elaborate on your earlier comments to help me imagine a particular policy or practice or strategy or intervention you might have in mind that is weighty enough to get to that sort of undercurrent that you spoke about and strong enough to withstand the kind of currents that might sweep it up or sabotage our projects to construct or deconstruct what needs to be constructed or deconstructed.
Well, that's why I talked about giving each student an opportunity plan. Because we've been so wrapped up in our language talking about all students and now school-based reform. You know, Martin Luther King's school can be reformed, but Malcolm can still be left behind. And if we believe that education is a social contract, Malcolm deserves an opportunity to learn also. Each of us can identify a Malcolm who's a grade level or more behind, who has been behind for a number of years. And we've known that Malcolm has been behind. But yet there isn't one plan related to Malcolm, short of those who say, well, place Malcolm in special education when Malcolm should not be in special education. Malcolm needs the additional academic, social, or health supports in order to address the challenge. And that's why I say, let's not be so focused on talking about all that we lose each. Let's think about what are the policies that we can put in place so that each child will have an opportunity to learn, and not in a way of just creating another program, but the policies that we can put in place so that each child, and you know, that's one of the things that we're working on at the foundation, is to begin to talk with community advocates and to craft the types of policy proposals that reflect their values and reflect their voice and reflect the fact that each child should have a fair and substantive opportunity to learn. So there's more on the website, otlcampaign.org, or there's more on our Schott Foundation website, schottfoundation.org. So I want to thank you, and I appreciate being here. Thank you, Dean. God bless you all.
Good evening, everyone. It's great to see all of you here. So each year, the Alumni of Color Conference recognizes a member of our home group that has made an extraordinary contribution to education in communities of color. And this year, I am really pleased, and I feel very honored and humbled that AOCC has asked me to present these 3 awards. And so obviously, the first awardee of our weekend is John Jackson. And I just want to say, John, you and I have known each other for a while now. We won't say how long.
Right.
But this gentleman inspires me every time he opens his mouth. And so it is my honor, and on behalf of the Alumni of Color Conference, we want to present you with an award tonight for your achievements.
Thank you. No, I mean, I think we have had said enough. This is very meaningful, so I'll just say thank you and good night.
Man, I'm so glad all I have to tell you is we're about to go eat and a couple reminders. So again, congratulations and thank you to Jackson. It was very powerful to you. I loved your metaphor, but that's on a personal note. I know that our professor, Dr. Deborah Jewel Sherman, talks to us about how we should use metaphors to explain our messages, and so just seeing that in actuality was awesome. All right, so here's what I would like all of you to check out. We have here our sort of our Bible for the weekend, for tonight and tomorrow. Basically, the first 2 pages of the program overview. I feel so program overview. And so tomorrow is going to be very powerful, just like tonight. We will have workshops. So I had an opportunity this afternoon to go to one, and it was very insightful about educational experiences of Latinas. Tomorrow there will be some more of that, and we'll continue to disrupt discourse. That's our theme. We're gonna really turn up the heat, to use some high fits in reference to my program director, which, by the way, also my name's Erasmo, and I'm in the school leadership program, and there's many of us here, thanks to the program director, Professor Lee Taito, who disrupted discourse and paid for a couple of us to come here and financed us being here, including myself. So thank you to Professor Taito. We need more of that to continue our movement. So we're also going to have keynote speakers tomorrow. We're going to have Limon Moi in the morning, and in the afternoon we're going to have Dr. Sarah Lawrence Johnson, which I'm so... Say what? Yeah. That's a mistake. That's a bad mistake. Especially because I read her book. It's a ghost. My ghost just came out. It's in her book. It's a reference. Anyhow. Yeah, I do that. I disrupt discourse all the time. Now, really, what I would like to do is to invite you to our reception, which is going to be over at Gutman. So please continue these conversations, have some food, enjoy, chit-chat, correct me. And yeah, thanks again for coming tonight. So yeah.